you referred to the stagflation in the 1970s, and that was met with a period when we had oil price shocks that also influenced the markets. Now, in this situation, we have seen very, very subdued demand for oil and oil prices. That also has implications on the Middle East. So we've had several questions from our audience about your views on oil prices and the economies of the Middle East, how they've been affected in this crisis and how they may be affected afterwards.
Of course, for a while, in the depth of the crisis, there was a collapse in oil prices for two reasons. One was this kind of a supply war within Russia and Saudi Arabia and some of the OPEC countries. But more important even than that supply war, there was a collapse of demand, both of transportation, auto vehicles, but also of jet fuel because of the collapse of airlines and so on. Since then, there has been a recovery of oil prices. There was a day in which, as you remember, one of the contracts, actually the price for the WTI even went negative. Oil prices have gone back to the 30s and the 40s. They're not back to what they used to be in the 60s or 70s, the way they were, say, in the fall of last year. Why that's the case has been a recovery. We have the end of this global recession, and we have the beginning of a tentative recovery. The recovery has been stronger in China. Many people actually find safer to drive cars rather than using mass transportation. But of course, the recovery is still tentative. It might be a U rather than a V, and there has been a softening of growth. And in the case of jet fuel, of course, aviation is recovering very, very slowly, both for tourism and for business and other activity, and therefore the demand for jet fuel remains limited. In addition to these cyclical factors, I think that most producers of oil, starting with those in the Gulf, are realizing there are some structural forces that may limit how much demand for oil is going to rise even in the medium term, and prices are going to rise. We may be at the point of peak demand for oil in the next 10 to 20 years, because gradually we're going to move to more electric vehicles and autonomous vehicles. There is, of course, these ESG pressures to try to reduce use of fossil fuels. There is now many alternatives to fossil fuels that are becoming competitive and cost effective, whether it's solar energy, wind, and other types of alternative to fossil fuels. And of course, within fossil fuels, there has been a sharp increase in production of shale gas and oil that is also bearing on oil prices. And therefore, the supply is going to remain high, while demand for a number of structural factors might gradually fall. And therefore, over the medium term, probably demand for oil is going to be soft relative to supply, and that's going to be a downside to prices. That's why I think whether it's Saudi Arabia, of course, the Emirates and everybody else in the Gulf, but also in other oil exporting countries, realize that your economic strategy has to be one in which you have to gradually diversify away from relying on oil for GDP growth, for revenues, for your external balances, for building up assets and so on. And you need the reorientation of the economy and diversification. Of course, there are some success stories already in the Gulf, like the examples of Dubai, and there are a variety of plans, Vision 2030 in Saudi Arabia, and similar ones in many, of creating an economy that is based more on manufacturing, based on services and advanced services. And of course, you have to educate workers, provide them with skills, retraining, education to have that transformation. But I think that there is a consensus that that diversification away from oil and fossil fuels should be occurring in the next decade. And there is a lot of very good economic plans to go in that direction. Of course, the devil is in the detail, and these plans will have to be forcefully implemented over time to make sure that that diversification occurs. Now, the country in the Gulf have the luck that they have a very large amount still of assets through their variety of sovereign wealth funds and public pension funds in order to make that transition, and their stocks of public debt are still relatively low. So they have the financial resources to finance that transition, but this is not, of course, the time to be complacent. You'll have to do this transition faster and sooner to make sure that that diversification and stronger economic and financial stability is going to occur in the next decade. I'm optimistic that that process is going to continue and accelerate in the right direction.